The Depression-era pantry held 5 things and nothing else: a sack of cornmeal, a tin of lard, a bag of dried beans, a can of tomatoes, a handful of onions. Out of those 5 staples, a generation of American grandmothers fed whole families through a decade that broke the country. Number 17 on this list takes 1 hot dog and turns it into supper for 6. Number 11 was the Sunday lunch when payday landed on Wednesday. And number 3 on this list is the bowl that put more kids to sleep in 1934 than any lullaby. What those Depression cooks did was simple. They stretched a dime until it whistled, and they wrote down the proof. So hit subscribe and pull up a chair, because here are 25 poor man's meals that let seniors laugh at the grocery bill. Number 25. Beans and weenies. Few suppers hit the table with as much honest pride as a skillet of beans and weenies. The dish started as a Depression kitchen workhorse, a can of pork and beans cracked open and stretched with a sliced frankfurter that cost pennies at the corner butcher. Working mothers in mill towns kept the can on the shelf for the nights when payday was 3 days off. They sliced the hot dog into thin coins, browned the coins until the edges curled, then poured the beans over the top and let the pan simmer until the sauce thickened. A spoon of mustard went in for tang. The pot fed 4 for under a quarter through most of the 1930s, and by 1955 it had quietly become the standard Boy Scout campfire supper. Seniors who lived through that era still keep a can in the pantry. 12 minutes from stove to bowl, no chopping, no fuss. Number 24. Milk toast. Before cereal boxes lined every shelf, milk toast was what landed in front of children on cold mornings. Toast the bread until it was sturdy. Warm a cup of milk over low heat. Pour the milk over the toast in a shallow bowl and finish with a pat of butter that melted into a slow yellow puddle. Some households added a pinch of salt. Others sprinkled cinnamon sugar across the top for a child running a fever. By the 1930s, milk toast had earned a second name in American kitchens: sickroom food. It was soft enough for a grandmother with no teeth, mild enough for a toddler with an upset stomach, and cheap enough for a widow stretching her last quart of milk through the week. The dish disappeared from menus when sugary cereals arrived in the 1950s, but seniors today bring it back the moment a head cold hits. Number 23. Tomato gravy on toast. Down through the rural South, tomato gravy on toast was the breakfast that kept whole families upright during the lean years. A can of crushed tomatoes hit a hot skillet greased with bacon drippings. A spoon of flour went in to thicken the pan. A splash of milk softened the acid into something closer to cream than sauce. 5 minutes later, the gravy was ladled across a slab of toasted bread, and a working man left for the field with something warm sitting in his stomach until noon. The dish was a fixture in Tennessee and Kentucky farmhouses through the 1930s and 1940s. The recipe traveled north when families moved up to Detroit and Akron for factory jobs. What kept it alive was the math. A 25-cent can of tomatoes fed a household of 6. The bread was day-old, the drippings were free, and the milk came from the neighbor's cow on trade. Number 22. Hot water cornbread. Long before baking powder reached the back roads, hot water cornbread was already feeding the South. The recipe is 2 ingredients: yellow cornmeal, boiling water, a pinch of salt if the cook had it. The trick was the pour. Hot water went into the cornmeal in a slow stream while one hand stirred and the other held the kettle steady. The dough came together in seconds. Each patty got shaped by hand, slid into a skillet bubbling with lard, and fried until the crust turned the color of pulled toffee. By the Depression, it had become the daily bread of African American kitchens across Mississippi and Alabama, partly because cornmeal cost less than wheat flour, and partly because lard came free with every hog. Seniors who keep a tin of cornmeal in the cabinet can have supper on the table in 11 minutes flat. Number 21. Navy bean soup. Senate dining rooms have served navy bean soup every day since 1903, and the recipe has barely moved in over a century. A pound of dried navy beans soaked overnight, a ham hock from the smokehouse, an onion chopped fine, water enough to cover by 3 fingers. The pot sat on the back burner for 3 hours while the beans gave up their starch and the ham gave up its salt. Out in the Depression-era heartland, The same pot was the Friday supper that carried families through to Sunday. The beans cost 9 cents a pound. The hock came free with the side of pork. Seniors today get 4 meals out of a single batch, with enough left to freeze a quart for the week the gas bill comes due. Number 20. Spam Pan Fry. Hormel rolled the first can of Spam off the line in Austin, Minnesota in 1937, and the country was waiting for it. By the time the Second World War landed, American kitchens had already worked out the simplest way to cook it. Slice it 1/4 inch thick. Drop the slices into a dry cast iron pan over medium heat. Wait until the edges curl up and the center turns the color of pulled molasses. 2 minutes aside, no oil, no seasoning. The salt was already in the meat. Working families in the 1940s served the slices over fried potatoes for supper and tucked the leftovers into a lunch pail with mustard. By the 1950s, a 12-ounce can fed a family of 5 for under 50 cents. 3 slices, 1 onion, 1 potato. Supper for 2 in under 12 minutes. Number 19. Government Cheese Melt. By 1981, the federal government was sitting on 560 million pounds of cheese, most of it stacked in limestone caves outside Kansas City and rented warehouses across the Midwest. The interest on storing all that dairy was running $1 million a day. That December, President Reagan signed the order that put the surplus on the move. 5-pound bricks of bright orange processed cheese stamped with the seal of the United States Department of Agriculture started landing at senior centers and church halls from Brooklyn to Bakersfield. The block came wrapped in waxed cardboard. The cut required a sharp knife and a steady hand. And the melt, when it hit a hot pan with 2 slices of buttered bread, became one of the defining suppers of the early 1980s. Working grandmothers who had raised children on Hoover stew now raised grandchildren on government cheese sandwiches. They sliced the brick a 1/2 inch thick. They buttered the bread on the outside. They pressed the sandwich down with a coffee can full of dried beans while the first side browned, then flipped it once and let the cheese pull into long elastic strands. By 1984, the United States was storing 5 pounds of cheese for every American citizen, and 300 million pounds had moved through the Temporary Emergency Food Assistance Program. The cheese tasted nothing like cheddar and everything like comfort. It melted clean. It froze well. It kept in the icebox for months. Seniors who lived through the early Reagan years can still taste the first bite. The crust was burnished gold. The center was molten and slightly sweet, and the bill at the door said 0 because the block had come from a government finally admitting that letting food rot while families ate cold was not a policy any country could defend. Decades later, the recipe still works on a $5 block from the dairy case. Number 18. Biscuits and white gravy. Few breakfasts have carried more workers to more shifts than biscuits and white gravy. The gravy is a roux of bacon drippings and flour, whisked over low heat until the flour turns the color of buttermilk. Cold milk goes in next, a slow pour with constant stirring until the pan thickens into something a spoon stands up in. Salt and a heavy hand of black pepper finish the work. The biscuits underneath were day-old, split open and warmed on the stove. The dish came up from the logging camps of the Carolinas in the 1880s, traveled west with the railroads, and settled into every truck stop diner between Knoxville and Amarillo by 1935. Seniors who grew up on a farm remember it as the breakfast that filled a man before sunrise and held him until lunch. Number 17. Hot dog goulash. This is the trick the intro promised, the one that takes 1 hot dog and feeds 6. The recipe came out of Pittsburgh kitchens in the 1930s and spread along the Allegheny by way of mill workers' lunch buckets. 1 frankfurter sliced into 30 thin coins, a pound of elbow macaroni, a can of crushed tomatoes, an onion chopped fine. The onion softened in a hot skillet, then the hot dog coins browned in the released oil. The tomatoes went in, then the macaroni, and the pan got a slow stir until the sauce coated every noodle. The single hot dog dispersed across the pot, and every bowl ended up with 5 or 6 coins of meat. The dish fed a family of 6 for under 30 cents and showed up in church potluck rotations into the 1960s. Number 16. Mock chicken legs. Polish-American kitchens in Pittsburgh and Cleveland came up with this one around 1908, and the recipe spread to Detroit and Buffalo within a decade. Chicken in the city was expensive and scarce. Pork shoulder and veal scraps from the butcher cost a fraction of the price. Cooks cut the meat into 1-inch cubes, threaded the cubes onto a wooden skewer, and shaped the whole thing to mimic the leg of a chicken. The skewers got rolled in beaten egg, then in cracker crumbs, then browned in a cast-iron skillet until the crust turned the color of a copper penny. A lid went on the pan for the last 20 minutes so the meat steamed itself tender. By the Depression, mock chicken legs were a Sunday dinner across the Great Lakes industrial belt. A pound of pork and veal scraps cost 15 cents and fed a family of 5. Seniors today still call it city chicken. Number 15. Salmon patties. By the mid-1930s, a New Deal subsidy had pushed the price of a tall can of pink salmon down to under 5 cents at Southern general stores. The recipe that emerged is still the cheapest fish supper in America. Drain a can of salmon. Pick out the obvious bones, leave the soft ones for the calcium. Crack 1 egg. Add a sleeve of crushed saltines for the binder. Form into 4 patties the size of a coffee saucer. The patties hit a hot skillet greased with bacon drippings and fried 2 minutes aside until the crust turned the color of toasted hazelnut. The dish carried Southern families through the Depression and reached peak popularity by the end of World War II. By the way, real quick before the next one, if these old supper plates are stirring up something familiar, the full Poor Man's Wisdom recipe collection is sitting in the description below. Hand-typed cards, original measurements, no modern shortcuts. Worth a look while the pan is still warming. Number 14. Oat groat porridge. Whole oat groats sat in barrels at the back of every general store through the 1920s and 1930s. The price was 3 cents a pound, sometimes less if the cook brought her own sack. The groats were the unrolled, uncut form of the oat, and they took an hour to cook down. Most households soaked a cup overnight in cold water, then simmered the soaked groats in salted water the next morning until each kernel split open and released its starch. A pat of butter went in at the end. A spoon of brown sugar finished the bowl. The porridge held a working man through a full morning of hauling lumber or pouring concrete. Seniors who keep a jar of groats in the pantry today get 16 breakfasts out of a $2 bag, with enough fiber to keep a doctor quiet for the year. Number 13. Onion sandwich. James Beard learned this sandwich from caterers Irma and Bill Rode in 1940 and put it in print that same year. But the dish was already a Depression mainstay in the Oregon farmhouses where Beard grew up. The recipe demands almost nothing. 2 slices of soft white bread, a thick slab of sweet onion, sliced paper thin, a generous swipe of mayonnaise on both pieces of bread, salt and pepper. The trick is the onion, Vidalia in season or a Walla Walla, or any sweet variety the garden produced. The slice has to be thin enough to read a newspaper through. Beard served the same sandwich at Manhattan dinner parties for 40 years and never once apologized for the cost. Seniors who serve it call it the most expensive tasting nickel they ever spent. Number 12. Ham bone soup. This soup is the second life of every Easter ham, and Depression-era kitchens knew exactly what to do with the bone the moment the last slice came off. The bone went into a stock pot with a gallon of cold water, a bay leaf, a quartered onion, and whatever beans the cupboard offered, usually Navy or Great Northern. The pot simmered 4 hours on the back of the stove until the marrow loosened and the meat that clung to the joint surrendered into the broth. A diced carrot and a stalk of celery went in for the last hour. The pot fed 6 on a single bone that the butcher would have thrown out, and the broth alone was rich enough to spoon over rice the next day. Seniors who keep a ham bone in the freezer for January suppers still call it the cheapest pot of comfort a kitchen can produce. Number 11. Fried potato sandwich. This is the Sunday lunch the intro promised, the one that landed on the table when payday landed on Wednesday. The recipe is 2 potatoes and 2 slices of bread per person. The potatoes got peeled, sliced into thin coins, and laid down in a hot skillet greased with bacon drippings until both sides turned the color of caramel. A pinch of salt finished the cooking. The The slices got piled between two pieces of soft white bread with a heavy swipe of butter on each slice. Some households added a smear of mustard. Others slipped in a thin layer of raw onion. The sandwich fed a working man through a half day of yard chores and cost less than a nickel through most of the 1930s. By 1942, the same sandwich was a packed lunch staple at shipyards from Baltimore to San Diego. Seniors still call it the supper that tasted like Sunday on a Wednesday budget. Number 10. Cabbage and noodles. When Polish and Slovak immigrants settled in the steel towns of Pittsburgh, Youngstown, and Cleveland in the early 1900s, they brought Haluski with them and never let it go. The dish is butter, cabbage, and egg noodles. Half a head of green cabbage went into a hot skillet with a quarter pound of butter and a chopped onion. The cabbage cooked down for 20 minutes until the edges browned and the center turned silky. A pound of wide egg noodles boiled in a separate pot, drained, and got dumped right into the cabbage skillet. A heavy crack of black pepper and a pinch of caraway seed finished the pan. By the 1930s, every parish hall fish fry from the Monongahela to Lake Erie served it on Friday night. The dish fed 8 on under $1 through the Depression, and the leftovers crisped up beautifully in a buttered skillet the next morning. Seniors who grew up in those mill towns still serve it on Christmas Eve. Number 9. Water pie. Down in the lean kitchens of Appalachia and the rural South, water pie was the dessert that proved a cook could conjure something from nothing. Number 9. Water pie. The recipe predates the Depression by half a century, with a 1871 reference to water custard pie circulating in farm almanacs, but it became famous in the 1930s when milk and eggs got scarce. The shell was an unbaked pie crust. The filling was 1½ cups of water poured straight into the crust, 4 tablespoons of flour, and a cup of sugar sprinkled on top without stirring, 2 tablespoons of butter dotted across the surface, and a splash of vanilla. The pie went into a hot oven for an hour. What came out was a translucent custard that tasted like vanilla pudding and cost under a dime to make. Seniors who lived through 1934 winters in West Virginia still remember the pie as the Sunday treat that asked nothing of the icebox. Number 8. Johnny Cakes. Take a cup of fine white cornmeal, a half teaspoon of salt, and a kettle of boiling water, and you have the oldest American breakfast still on a Rhode Island table. Number 8. Johnny Cakes. The Narragansett people taught the recipe to colonists in the 1600s, and by 1739 the name had stuck in print across South Carolina farm journals. The traditional method demands stone-ground white flint corn, the kind Kenyon's grist mill on the Pawcatuck River has produced since 1886. The cornmeal sits in a bowl. Boiling water goes in slowly while a wooden spoon stirs. The batter rests for 3 minutes, then drops by the spoonful into a hot greased skillet. Each cake fries 4 minutes aside until the crust turns the color of pine bark. Seniors serve them with butter and a drizzle of maple syrup for under 15 cents a stack. Number 7. Dried apple stack cake. And then there is the cake the Appalachian Mountains built one thin layer at a time. Number 7. Dried apple stack cake. The cake came up out of Tennessee and eastern Kentucky in the late 1800s as a wedding cake for families who could not afford a fancy bakery. Every guest brought a single layer. The bride's mother provided the apple filling. The layers were thin biscuit-style discs of flour, lard, sorghum molasses, ginger, and buttermilk, rolled out the size of a dinner plate and baked one at a time on a cast-iron lid. The filling was a thick paste of dried apples that had soaked overnight, cooked down with brown sugar and cinnamon until it turned the color of cooled coffee. The baker stacked 6 or 7 layers with a heavy spread of filling between each. The cake sat under a tea towel for 2 days while the filling worked its way into the dry layers, and by the wedding morning, the whole thing had softened into something close to a moist gingerbread. By 1935, the recipe was a fixture at every harvest revival from the Cumberland Gap to the Smokies. The math made sense. A pound of dried apples cost a dime. A jar of sorghum cost a quarter. The flour and lard were already in the house. The cake fed 30 guests for under $1 and tasted nothing like a Depression supper, and everything like a celebration. Seniors today still bake it for October birthdays. The trick, the old mountain bakers said, was patience. A stacked cake eaten the day it was assembled was a dry biscuit with jam between the layers. A stacked cake eaten 3 days later was the finest dessert a poor kitchen ever produced. Number 6. Peanut butter bread. In the spring of 1932, the makers of Five Roses Flour published a small cookbook titled A Guide to Good Cooking, and on page 41 sat the recipe that pulled a generation of mothers through the worst year of the Depression. Number 6. Peanut butter bread. The recipe is 6 ingredients: 2 cups of flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, a quarter cup of sugar, a half teaspoon of salt, a cup of milk, a heaping half cup of peanut butter. Everything got stirred together in one bowl and poured into a greased loaf pan. The oven did the rest. The bread baked for 45 minutes at 325 degrees and came out the color of a roasted chestnut. The crust was crisp. The center was dense, slightly sweet, and tasted like a peanut butter cookie that had been pressed into a sandwich. A loaf cost under 12 cents to make and fed a family of 5 for 2 breakfasts. Number 5. Baked apples. There was no shortage of apples in the Depression-era pantry, and the baked apple was the dessert that turned a windfall harvest into a winter's worth of suppers. Number 5. Baked apples. The recipe needs 4 apples, a quarter cup of brown sugar, a tablespoon of butter, and a pinch of cinnamon. The cook cored each apple from the top down, leaving the bottom intact to hold the filling. Brown sugar and a knob of butter went into the hollow. A dusting of cinnamon finished the top. The apples sat in a shallow pan with a half-inch of water and went into a moderate oven for 40 minutes. The filling melted into a caramel that ran down the sides and pooled in the pan. A windfall bushel from the orchard fence cost nothing in October. Seniors today still serve the apples warm with a spoonful of cream. Number 4. Dumplings in broth. Sunday dinners stretched on a working man's wage often came down to a pot of chicken broth and a bowl of flour dumplings. Number 4. Dumplings in broth. The broth was the strained liquid from a stewed hen, the same hen that had given 2 eggs a day for 3 years and was now too old to lay. The dumplings were a mix of 2 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a half teaspoon of salt, and enough milk to make a sticky dough. The dough got dropped by the tablespoon into the simmering broth, the lid went on tight, and the pot cooked for 15 minutes without lifting. The dumplings doubled in size and turned light enough to float. A hen that had laid out her useful years still fed a family of 6 through Sunday supper and Monday lunch. Number 3. Cornmeal mush. This is the bowl the intro promised, the one that put more children to sleep in 1934 than any lullaby. The recipe is 1 cup of yellow cornmeal, 4 cups of water, a teaspoon of salt, and a pat of butter for the bowl. The water came to a hard boil in a heavy pot. The cornmeal went in by the slow stream while a wooden spoon stirred in a single direction. The pot dropped to a low simmer and cooked for 30 minutes with a stir every 5 so the bottom never caught. The mush thickened until the spoon stood on its own. A ladle filled a bowl. A splash of warm milk went over the top. A spoon of molasses or honey finished the surface, and the butter melted into a slow yellow ring around the edge. By the Depression, the bowl was the bedtime supper for half the children in the rural South and the working-class North. The price was 3 cents a serving. The warmth in the belly outlasted the cold in the bedroom. Mothers who had nothing else to offer at the end of a bad week could still ladle a bowl of mush, kiss a forehead, and watch a child fall asleep before the first bite hit the spoon. Seniors who grew up on it can still feel the bowl in their hands. Number 2. Hardtack and bacon. These hard biscuits carried the Union Army through 4 years of war and crossed the prairie in every covered wagon between St. Louis and Sacramento. Number 2. Hardtack and bacon. The biscuit is 3 ingredients: 2 cups of flour, a teaspoon of salt, a half cup of water. The dough got rolled to a half-inch thickness, scored into squares the size of a pocket watch, docked with 16 fork holes per piece, and baked at a low oven for 90 minutes until the crackers turned the color of bone and the texture of a roofing shingle. Hardtack kept for a year in a tin and traveled the Oregon Trail without a single complaint. The Depression revival was simpler. Cooks dunked the cracker in hot coffee for 30 seconds, then fried it in bacon drippings until the edges crisped. 2 slices of bacon went on top. A working man left for the section gang with a stack of 4 wrapped in a flour sack napkin. The dish fed a household of 5 through the worst winter of 1934 on less than a quarter a week. Seniors who keep a tin in the cabinet still call it the bread that refused to spoil. Number 1. Bread pudding. By the time the loaf had gone hard on Thursday, every grandmother in the country already knew where it was going on Friday. Number 1. Bread pudding. The pudding turned 6 slices of stale bread into a Sunday dessert that fed 8. The bread got torn into a buttered baking dish. 2 cups of warm milk went over the top to soften the crumb. 2 beaten eggs, a half cup of sugar, a teaspoon of vanilla, and a heavy dusting of cinnamon got whisked into the milk before it poured. A handful of raisins, if the cupboard offered them, scattered across the surface. The dish went into a moderate oven for 45 minutes until the top puffed golden and the center set into a soft custard. A loaf that the bakery would have thrown out on Saturday morning became the dessert that closed Sunday supper. Number 17. Pasta and peas. You diced a potato, diced half an onion, fried them in olive oil until soft, dumped in a can of peas with its liquid, added water to cook a half pound of rigatoni. A woman named Clara Canucciari grew up eating it in upstate New York during the Depression and made it famous on YouTube at age 91 before she passed at 98. She said pasta was the crutch her family leaned on when there was no meat for the table, no money for the rent, and no light at the end of the calendar. The potato thickens the broth, the pea liquid salts the sauce, the pasta holds on to everything. 40 cents in 1934. $2 and change today. Cheaper than fast food? Better than fast food. Clara cooked the pasta directly in the pea water because the starch and the canning salt built a glossy sauce without butter. She made it the way her grandmother had on a wood stove. Number 16. Wilted lettuce salad with bacon dressing. A head of leaf lettuce out of the Indiana garden in June got ripped into a wide ceramic bowl with a sliced green onion and a sprinkle of salt. Your mother fried 4 strips of bacon in a black skillet until they shattered when she squeezed them. She crumbled the bacon over the lettuce and held the skillet over the bowl. Then she poured a quarter cup of cider vinegar and 2 tablespoons of sugar into the hot grease and stirred it until it bubbled. The whole pan, fat and all, went over the lettuce in one slow stream. The leaves wilted on contact, soft and warm and salty. A boiled egg sliced over the top, a few cracks of pepper. 10 cents in lettuce, 15 in bacon, and a Wednesday supper landed on the porcelain enamel table beside a plate of cornbread. Number 15. Dripping sandwich on rye. The brown jelly that gathered in the bottom of the roast pan went into a clay crock by the stove. A foundry worker at the Goodyear plant in Akron in 1939 spread cold beef dripping on a thick slice of caraway rye, salted it heavy, and ate it before the second whistle. The dark layer of meat juice that settled at the bottom of the crock was called the jelly, and that was the part the man of the house got first because his arm was holding the family up. The white fat on top went into pie crust and biscuit dough. A single crock from a Sunday roast lasted a family of 7 through October. Number 15 had no recipe. Your grandmother did not write it down because there was nothing to measure. You learned the sandwich the same way you learned to walk. Number 18. Spam fried in a cast iron skillet. You opened the can with the pull tab, slid the pink loaf onto the board, sliced it 8 times against the grain, and laid the slices in a hot, dry skillet. Hormel introduced Spam in 1937 to move pork shoulder that nobody was buying. The 1940 Hormel cookbook listed 50 ways to cook it. By the end of World War II, the United States military had received over 150 million pounds of Spam, and every soldier coming home had an opinion. Some men hated it. Most kept eating it on a Sunday morning for life because it was the cheapest hot meat in the store and lasted on a shelf 2 years. Your grandfather fried it in lard with eggs and never apologized. The sugar and sodium nitrite in the Hormel recipe gave the surface a dark caramel crust on cast iron. A single 12-ounce can sliced 8 ways fed 3, but you had to slice it thin. Thin meat looked like more meat. Number 20. Sausage gravy and biscuits. The kitchen lit up at 5:30 in the morning in a coal town in West Virginia. Your father had a thermos to fill and a half hour to get to the tipple. Your mother crumbled a half-pound of pork sausage into a cast-iron skillet, browned it dark, sprinkled 3 tablespoons of flour over the grease, and stirred it into a paste the color of saddle leather. She poured in 2 cups of whole milk slowly, scraping the bottom of the pan until the gravy thickened around the meat. Salt, black pepper, a grind of sage if she had it from the garden. The biscuits had been beaten together with self-rising flour and a fistful of lard the night before and slept in the oven until the gravy was done. 2 split biscuits on a thick white plate, gravy ladled over the top, and a man could carry a coal seam on his back until noon. Number 20. Schnitz Pie Hand Pie. Pennsylvania Dutch women in Lebanon County strung apple slices on cotton thread and dried them on the back porch every September. And from October to April, those dried schnitz simmered into a thick brown filling spiced with cinnamon, clove, and a single nutmeg shaving. The filling went into a folded lard crust the size of a man's hand, the edges crimped with the back of a fork, baked until the bottom turned dark, and sent down to the colliery with a heel of rye bread. A breaker boy at the Glen Burn mine outside Shamokin in 1922 was 9 years old and got 2 of these in his bucket with a bottle of cold sweet tea. The dried apple kept for months on a pantry shelf, the pastry kept its shape underground, and the sweetness was the only sugar a miner saw between Sunday and Sunday. And the breaker boys ate them 6 days out of 7. Number 13. Poor man's meal of hot dogs and potatoes. You diced 4 potatoes, fried them in bacon grease until brown, threw in half a chopped onion, then sliced 4 hot dogs into coins for the last 6 minutes. Salt, pepper, a glug of ketchup on the side of the plate. That was supper in a coal camp in 1937, in a Bakersfield trailer in 1981, and in a kitchen in Ohio tonight. The dish has no recipe card. It is the working family's reflex meal, the one a man cooks when his wife is at the late shift. It costs about $3 to make today. It costs nothing to remember. Both are true at once. The order matters more than the recipe. Potatoes first, all the way to a deep brown crust, then the onion for sweetness, and the hot dogs only at the very end so the casing split and rendered their own fat into the pan. Number 17. Cold fried chicken back. The piece of the bird nobody at the Sunday table fought over went into the pail on Monday. A textile mill weaver in Kannapolis in 1951 brought 1 cold chicken back wrapped in newspaper, salted heavy, eaten without a napkin. The skin had set hard from the night in the icebox, and the meat clung in shreds along the spine. You picked it apart with your fingers on a wooden spool over the canal. The bird had cost 49 cents on Saturday, fed 5 at supper, and still gave a man his Monday lunch. What most people miss about a chicken back is that it was the cheapest cut and the last cut to disappear. Number 20. Tuna noodle casserole. You opened a can of chicken of the sea, a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, boiled egg noodles, mixed it with a cup of milk, topped it with crushed potato chips, and broiled it 10 minutes. The first printed recipe came out of Sunset magazine in 1930 from a Kennewick, Washington woman named only as Mrs. WFS. Campbell's introduced cream of mushroom soup in 1934, and that one product is the reason your grandmother made this every Thursday for 31 years. By 1959, 8 out of 10 households served canned tuna weekly, with this casserole in the top 3 uses. It fed a working family of 5 for less than $1. It still does. Your aunt is still making it. The genius detail was the potato chip crust on top, which turned to glass under the broiler and shattered when you ran the spoon through the dish. The crunch is what your cousins remembered, not the tuna, the chips. Number 12. Sloppy Joes from scratch. There was no Manwich in 1962. There was a pound of ground beef at the A&P for 59 cents, a chopped onion, a chopped green pepper, a half cup of ketchup, 2 tablespoons of yellow mustard, a tablespoon of brown sugar, a tablespoon of cider vinegar, and a teaspoon of Worcestershire. Your mother browned the beef and the onion and the pepper together until the kitchen smelled like Saturday afternoon, drained off most of the fat with the lid pressed against the side, and stirred in everything else. 20 minutes simmering until the sauce went tacky. A spoon of the meat onto a soft Wonder Bread bun, a paper plate, a napkin folded once. The children ate over the plate with both hands and smeared sauce up to their elbows. 6 sandwiches from a pound of beef. The recipe was nowhere on paper. But by 1969, the orange Manwich can sat next to the ketchup at every Safeway in the country, and the scratch version disappeared inside 1 decade. Number 13. Onion sandwich on buttered bread. 2 slices of soft white bread from a Wonder Loaf, a thick yellow layer of butter, and a wheel of raw white Spanish onions sliced as thin as paper. A meat packer on the kill floor at the Swift & Company yards in the Chicago stockyards in 1932 carried this sandwich because his wife could not afford anything else through the worst 3 years of the Depression. You ate it on a wooden stool over a drain grate, and the raw onion cleared your eyes through the worst of the steam. The onion cost a penny. The butter she churned herself from the cream her sister mailed up from the dairy farm outside DeKalb. Strangers thought it was a poor man's lunch, but the man eating it knew it kept him standing through a 10-hour shift in a room that smelled like blood and ammonia. Number 24. Depression spaghetti. You opened a bottle of ketchup and you opened a box of pasta, and that was the entire grocery list. The home cooks of the 1930s figured out that sugar, vinegar, and tomato puree were the 3 things that made marinara taste like marinara, and ketchup already had all 3. You boiled the noodles, drained them, stirred in half a bottle of ketchup, and you had a plate that looked like Italian food on a budget that did not. A Japanese chef in 1945 watched American GIs eat C-ration spaghetti and invented Napolitan, still on Tokyo menus today. Down in Haiti, they make breakfast spaghetti with ketchup, sausage, and pepper. 1 cheap idea, 3 countries, all feeding workers. The bare-bones version fed millions across 2 decades. Number 14. SOS. The Navy called it a name unfit for a children's dinner table, but a Navy wife in Norfolk, Virginia, in 1962 called it Tuesday. A jar of Armour dried beef cost 39 cents at the commissary, and a quart of milk was 26. The trick was rinsing the beef under cold water first to pull the salt out, then tearing it into ribbons. She melted 3 tablespoons of butter in a saucepan, sprinkled 3 tablespoons of flour into the foam, and stirred a paste smooth before pouring 2 cups of milk in slowly. Black pepper. The shredded beef went in last. The whole gravy thickened in 5 minutes. 2 slices of toasted Wonder Bread on a plate, a generous ladle of the creamy beef over the top, and a Navy wife had supper for 4 for less than $1. Her husband ate it without complaint because he had eaten it on the ship for 10 years. Number 24. Cornish pasty wrapped in newspaper. A folded half-moon of pastry stuffed with diced beef, potato, onion, and a single turnip. Cornish miners brought the recipe across the ocean to the anthracite seams of Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, and the Iron Range of Calumet, Michigan. A miner's wife crimped the edge into a thick rope so her husband could grip it with coal-black fingers and eat without putting it down. She cut his initials into the corner so he could find his pail in the crib room when 40 men ate at once. One end of the pasty held meat and root vegetable, but the other end held stewed apple, sealed off so the savory side did not bleed into the sweet. The crust along the top edge she left thick like a handle, and that thick crust was for the knockers, the spirits the miners believed lived in the dark seams of the mountain. You left your crust on the rib of the gangway and walked away before the next blast. Number 24 did not need a fork, a plate, or a clean hand, and that was the entire point. Number 16. Milk toast. You toasted 2 slices of stale white bread, dropped them in a wide bowl, heated a cup of milk just below a simmer, melted butter and sugar on the toast, then poured the hot milk over with a sprinkle of nutmeg. That was supper on a sick night in 1934. That was breakfast on a cold morning in 1947. Mark Twain ate it. Every grandmother in the Midwest made it for a child with a fever or a husband worn out from the late shift. The bread softened just enough to hold a spoon. The milk turned sweet from the butter melting under it. It cost less than a nickel a bowl. The genius was the staling. Day-old bread held the shape of a slice under hot milk. Fresh bread fell apart inside 90 seconds. Your grandmother set aside the heel of every loaf for milk toast, and that was how a kitchen wasted nothing across a generation. It still tastes like being loved. Number 18, macaroni and tomatoes. A box of Muller's Elbow macaroni cost 19 cents at the Sparkle Market in 1963. A can of Hunt's stewed tomatoes cost 15. Together, they made supper for a family of 4 for less than the price of a candy bar. Your mother boiled the macaroni in salted water, drained it, dumped it back in the pot, and stirred in the can of tomatoes straight, juice and all, with a pat of butter and a generous dash of salt and pepper. Some women added a teaspoon of sugar to cut the acid. Some women added a chopped onion if there was one in the bowl. Nobody added garlic. The dish came to the table in the same pot it was cooked in, with a wooden spoon sticking out and a sleeve of saltines beside it. It was the meal a Pennsylvania mill town ate on a Friday because Friday was payday and the rent came first. And children ate seconds and thirds because the pot held no shame. Number 19, hard-boiled egg and a pinch of salt. 2 eggs boiled hard in the same pot the family used for everything else, peeled at the kitchen table at 5 in the morning, then wrapped in a square of brown grocer's paper with a corner of salt twisted in like a pharmacy packet. A railroad shop hand at the Norfolk and Western Works in Roanoke in 1947 carried 2 of these in his pail every day for 26 years. You cracked the shell on the rim of the workbench and the salt spilled into the broken pieces of white. Some days, the yolk was still soft because the woman of the house had been called to a sick child the night before. But the egg was free if your family kept hens behind the rented duplex. It became the protein backbone of a Depression-era pail when meat was a Sunday item, and it stayed in the pail through the war and the post-war decade because the math had not changed. Number 22, mock apple pie from Ritz crackers. You broke up 36 Ritz crackers into a pie shell, poured a sugar syrup of water, sugar, lemon juice, and cream of tartar over the top, dusted it with cinnamon, and baked it for 30 minutes. What came out tasted enough like apple pie that grown men asked for seconds. Ritz hit shelves on November 21, 1934, at 19 cents a pound, and within 3 years they were the best-selling cracker in the world. Apples were expensive, crackers were cheap. The cream of tartar mimicked apple's tart bite, and the lemon did the rest. By the Second World War, Nabisco was printing the recipe on every blue cracker box. Your grandmother served it at church suppers. Nobody guessed, but you could only pull it off if you served it warm. Cold mock apple pie tasted like a soggy cracker, and that was the rule every Depression-era hostess passed down without writing it on the recipe card. Number 23. American goulash. The thing about goulash in 1964 was that it had nothing to do with Hungary. A pound of ground chuck went into a Dutch oven with a chopped onion, a can of stewed tomatoes, a can of tomato sauce, a tablespoon of paprika your mother had bought in 1957, and 3 cups of dry elbow macaroni straight from the box. Water to cover, lid on. 25 minutes on a low flame and supper was done. The macaroni soaked up everything. The grease married the tomato. The whole pot cost about 90 cents and fed a family of 6 with leftovers for the lunch pail. Children called it slumgullion and chop suey and busy day stew, and their mothers called it whatever the children wanted. There was never a recipe. There was a pound, a can, a box, and a stove. But the dish meant Tuesday was over and the rent was paid, and that was enough to put bowls on the table without anyone saying a word. Number 22, cold meatloaf sandwich with mustard. Sunday's loaf became Monday's lunch. A thick gray slab between 2 slices of buttered bread, a smear of brown German mustard, wrapped in wax paper and tucked into the bottom of a black domed pail. A construction foreman in Cleveland in 1958 unwrapped his at the bottom of a foundation hole on East 9th Street and ate it on a stack of rebar with a transistor radio in his coat pocket. The grease had bled into the bread by 10 o'clock, and that was the part you saved for last because the soaked corner tasted better than the meat. The wife who packed it had stretched 2 pounds of ground chuck with a sleeve of cracker meal, a yellow onion, and 2 eggs, so the loaf could feed the family of 6 at supper and her husband at noon the next day. 2 meals from 1 pan. And that was the whole math of the working week. Number 15. Water pie. You whisked 1.5 cups of water, a cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, 4 tablespoons of flour, and 4 pats of butter, then poured the lot into an unbaked shell. The first printed recipe ran in California in 1886, but the dish came back during the Depression when cooks had no eggs, no milk, and no excuse to skip dessert. The flour and the sugar set the water into a gelatinous custard in the oven, the butter floated to the top in beads of yellow, and the whole thing sliced clean once it cooled. Your great-grandmother served it at a wake in 1934 in West Virginia. Nobody knew it was made of water. They asked her for the recipe. She just smiled and lied. The chemistry is sugar binding water into syrup, then flour, gelating it into a sliceable solid past 200 degrees. You do not need to know any of that to bake one. You just need to trust the oven for 45 minutes and walk away. Number 15. Cabbage rolls. In a Polish neighborhood on the south side of Chicago in 1962, a Tuesday smelled like simmered cabbage from one end of Pulaski Road to the other. Your grandmother blanched a head of cabbage in a stock pot, peeled the leaves off one at a time, and trimmed the thick rib with a paring knife. She mixed a pound of ground beef with a cup of cooked rice, a chopped onion, an egg, salt, pepper, and a fistful of dill from the kitchen window. A scoop of meat into each leaf. Roll, tuck, roll. 18 rolls into a Dutch oven, packed tight as cigars, smothered in a quart of canned tomato juice with a tablespoon of brown sugar. 2 hours on a low flame. Across town the same Tuesday in a suburban tract house, a young Polish-American mother opened a box of Hamburger Helper. The cabbage rolls did not survive that switch. And by 1990, the dill plant on the kitchen window was gone, and so was the woman who had taught the rolling to her daughters in Polish. Number 21. Boiled potato and salt in wax paper. A single Idaho potato boiled the night before in the same iron pot the family used for everything else, salted heavy with the rough kosher kind, and folded into a square of wax paper. A textile spinner at the Beaumont Mills in Spartanburg in 1934 ate one for lunch every weekday for 11 years. Her pay was $9 a week and her kitchen had no icebox until 1939. You carried your potato in a flour sack folded twice over, and you ate it lukewarm on the loading dock with the other women. Sometimes there was a pat of butter pressed into the center, sometimes a strip of cold bacon, sometimes a wedge of onion. But most days there was just salt and the potato. The potato cost a penny at the company store. That was your lunch from the day she started in the carding room at 14 until the day the spindle took her right index finger. Number 14. Vinegar pie. You stirred half a cup of white vinegar into hot water, added a cup of sugar, 2 beaten eggs, 3 tablespoons of flour, a pat of butter, and a pinch of nutmeg. What came out of the oven tasted like a lemon meringue pie that had never seen a lemon. Vinegar pie traveled on wagon trains from Tennessee to Oregon and fed Laura Ingalls Wilder's family on the Dakota Prairie. The acid bit. The sugar covered it. The custard set in 25 minutes at 350. Your great-grandmother called it desperation pie. She made it on a Sunday when the preacher was coming. He asked for 2 slices, and the genius was the temperature of the water before the vinegar went in. The hot water dissolved the sugar all the way through, and only then did the cold acid hit, which kept the egg from scrambling on contact and gave the custard its silky texture. She brought the kettle to a near boil before she started. Number 22. Bread pudding with raisin sauce. A loaf of Wonder Bread that had gone stale on the counter for 3 days became Sunday dessert by the afternoon. Your mother tore the bread into a buttered baking dish, beat 4 eggs into a quart of milk with a half cup of sugar and a dash of vanilla, poured the custard over the bread, and pressed it down with the back of a wooden spoon. Cinnamon on top. 40 minutes at 350 until the top was burnished. The raisin sauce was a saucepan of brown sugar, water, butter, a spoon of cornstarch, and a handful of plump raisins simmered until syrupy. Pour it over a warm square. That was Sunday supper after church in 1962, and the recipe lived in nobody's book because nobody needed one. Your grandmother made it from a memory she could not date. Number 10. Day-old biscuit and sorghum. A buttermilk biscuit baked at 5 in the morning in a black cast-iron skillet, split with a thumb while it was still warm, and laid open with a heavy stripe of dark sorghum molasses. The biscuit went stale by noon, but the sorghum kept it soft in the middle and turned the crumb the color of old amber. A coal miner at the Lynch operation in Harlan County, Kentucky in 1937 ate 2 of these for lunch every weekday for 8 years on the long bench at the Mantrip station. The sorghum came from a neighbor's mule-drawn press in October, and a gallon lasted a family of 9 through April. The biscuit cost almost nothing. The sweetness was the only sugar most miners tasted between paychecks. Number 10 was a working man's dessert and a working man's whole lunch in the same hand, eaten in the dark at the foot of a coal seam. Number 25. Hoover stew. You learned this one in a soup line in 1932 because they were the only kitchens still cooking. A pot of macaroni, a can of stewed tomatoes, a can of corn, and whatever hot dogs the butcher could not sell that week. They named it after the president who took the blame, and Hooverville families ate it 3 nights a week for a decade. And the trick was the order. You cooked the macaroni first, drained most of the liquid, then dropped the tomatoes and corn into the same pot so the pasta starch thickened the broth without flour. 1 pot. 1 burner. 20 minutes total. The whole pan cost 20 cents in 1933 and fed 5. But a single mother in a Hooverville tent could put a hot supper on a folding table with 2 cans, 1 box of macaroni, and a stove that ran on scrap wood. Your grandmother called it supper. She was not ashamed. Number 24. Hash brown casserole. A bag of frozen O'Brien hash browns hit the Kroger freezer case in 1965 for 59 cents, and within a year, every Methodist potluck in Ohio had a Pyrex of it on the back of a folding table. You dumped the bag into a buttered 9x13, stirred in a can of cream of mushroom, a cup of sour cream, 2 cups of grated cheddar, and a stick of butter melted over the top. The crown was a sleeve of crushed cornflakes browned in the oven until the kitchen smelled like a diner at 6 in the morning. Nobody measured anything. The cans were the measure. It came out of the oven golden and heavy as a brick. 1 pan fed 8. Any woman who brought it to a funeral knew the dish would come back washed, stacked, and a thank you note tucked inside the lid. Nobody ever asked her for the recipe because everybody already knew it. Number 18. Crackers and milk in a thermos. A green thermos of cold whole milk and a sleeve of premium saltines wrapped in wax paper. The Thermos Bottle Company introduced the first official lunchbox thermos in 1920, and inside 10 years, a third of the men working the cotton mills in Greenville, South Carolina, were eating this exact lunch 6 days a week. You broke the saltines into a battered tin cup, poured the cold milk over them, and ate it with a spoon while the spinning frame ran in the next room. The crackers softened into a kind of pale porridge that filled a stomach for 4 hours. A saltine sleeve cost about 6 cents in 1933, and the milk came from a neighbor with a Jersey cow on the back lot, 50 cents a week. Now this lunch is a YouTube clip your grandmother smiles at when no one else is in the room, the way a person smiles at a song they had forgotten they once knew by heart. Number 21. Hamburger gravy on toast. You browned half a pound of ground beef in cast iron, sprinkled 3 tablespoons of flour into the grease, stirred a minute, then poured in 2 cups of milk and thickened it. You poured the gray, peppery gravy over toast. 30 cents fed 4 in 1962. The Navy called it SOS for short, which stood for 2 words your grandmother would not say out loud. The dish first appeared in the 1910 Manual for Army Cooks and fed soldiers from World War I through Vietnam. The trick is, the flour cooks in the beef fat for a full minute before the milk goes in. That kills the raw taste. Your father did it without thinking. What most people miss is that the bread mattered as much as the gravy. White toast was wrong. You wanted Wonder Bread 3 days stale because the dry crumbs soaked the gravy without going to mush. Number 17. Mock chicken legs. The butcher at the Piggly Wiggly in Sandusky sold a pound of ground veal and pork mixed for 49 cents in 1961, and a packet of bamboo skewers cost a dime at the 5 and dime. Your mother mashed the ground meat with a beaten egg, salt, pepper, a fistful of cracker crumbs, and a pinch of poultry seasoning until it held together. She formed it around a skewer in the shape of a small drumstick, rolled the whole thing in flour, dipped it in egg wash, and pressed it into more cracker crumbs. 6 legs to a sheet pan, a spoonful of butter on top. 40 minutes at 375. Out came a tray of golden cutlets dressed up like chicken, but cheaper, served with mashed potatoes and a spoon of pan gravy. Children believed they were eating chicken. The simple trick worked for 2 whole decades. But by 1985, the butcher had stopped grinding the veal, and the mock leg disappeared from American supper for good. Number 12. Cold beans and bacon in a mason jar. Pinto beans simmered overnight on the back of the stove with a slab of streak of lean bacon, salt pork, and an onion. The next morning, a quart of the cold pot went into a ball mason jar and rode in the bottom of a black lunch pail to the Goodyear tire plant in Akron in 1948. The man unscrewed the lid at the cinder block bench at noon and ate it cold with a metal spoon and a square of cornbread. The fat had risen to the top in a thick white cap, and that cap got eaten first because that was your calories. Cold beans were not a punishment. They were lunch for 500,000 blue-collar men in the post-war years, and they cost $1 a week to make at home. This was not a recipe a magazine ever printed because the editors never met the women cooking it. They were Polish, Mexican, Black, Appalachian, Sicilian. The math was simple. 2 pounds of beans, 1 piece of pork, an onion, water, and the time the woman of the house could spare. The factory ran on it long after the men who built it were dead. Number 19. American chop suey. You browned a pound of ground beef with a chopped onion, added a can of tomato sauce and a can of stewed tomatoes, stirred in 2 cups of cooked elbow macaroni, and called it dinner. New England called it chop suey. Michigan called it goulash. In Pittsburgh, your father called it Tuesday. The earliest printed recipe goes back to 1909. The version your grandmother knew came from a 1958 cookbook that added bacon and green peppers and stretched the pan to 6 people. But that is the working definition of genius. Cheap, filling, shameless. And the real engineering inside the bowl was the elbow macaroni itself, because the curl of the noodle held a tablespoon of tomato sauce on its own, which meant a single spoonful delivered 3 things at once: the meat, the starch, and the sauce. Number 10. Tuna noodle casserole with potato chip topping. A 6.5-ounce can of chicken of the sea cost 29 cents in 1963, and a bag of broken Lay's from the bottom shelf cost a dime. Your mother boiled a bag of egg noodles, drained them, and stirred in a can of cream of mushroom, a cup of milk, a cup of frozen peas, a can of drained tuna broken into flakes, and 2 cups of grated American cheese, salt and pepper, into a buttered Pyrex. The whole top got blanketed in crushed potato chips, golden and salty. 25 minutes at 350 until the chips were toasted and the cheese bubbled at the edges of the pan. A casserole that fed 6 children and 1 tired husband for under $1.20. It came back from every Lutheran church, potluck scraped clean to the dish. Number 14. Pickle and cheese on saltines. A wedge of yellow rat trap cheese cut thick with a paring knife, a slice of dill pickle from a mason jar in the cellar, and a stack of saltines held together with a brown rubber band. A Western Electric assembly worker at the Hawthorne plant in Cicero, Illinois in 1936 packed this lunch every Friday for 9 years because the cheese had to go before the weekend and the pickle never went bad. You built each cracker on the workbench between batches of telephone relays. The cheese had cost 23 cents a pound. The pickles came from cucumbers grown in the garden behind the duplex on 22nd Place, packed in brine, dill, and garlic the second week of August. You stacked the empty saltine box on the windowsill, and your wife used it to mail birthday cards to the cousins back in Bohemia. Nothing in that house was thrown out until it had failed at 3 different jobs. Number 11. Cornmeal mush fried in lard. You stirred a cup of yellow cornmeal into 4 cups of boiling salted water, cooked it 15 minutes until it pulled from the sides, poured it into a loaf pan, and cooled it overnight in the icebox. The next morning, you sliced it 1/2 inch thick, fried the slices in a tablespoon of lard until the outside was a dark mahogany crust, and ate them with butter, sorghum, or a fried egg on top. Your grandfather grew up on this in Pennsylvania Dutch country in the 1920s, and so did half of the Midwest. 1 pound of cornmeal cost 6 cents in 1932 and fed 6 for 2 days. The genius is the pause. You cook it once and eat it 3 different ways across 2 days. Fewer dishes, less wood, more meals. And the cooling step was non-negotiable. A warm slab turned to pudding. A cold one held its shape like a Tuscan polenta cake. Number 11. Frosted meatloaf. The Better Homes magazine had run a photograph in 1957 of a meatloaf piped with mashed potatoes like a birthday cake, and by 1962, every housewife in a tract house from Levittown to Lakewood had baked her own. 1.5 pounds of ground chuck mixed with a 1/2 cup of cracker crumbs, a beaten egg, a chopped onion, a 1/4 cup of ketchup, salt, and pepper. Loaf pan. 40 minutes at 375. Out it came. A second pan of buttery mashed potatoes had been waiting on the back of the stove. Your mother frosted the meatloaf with the potatoes using a long spatula, swirled the top in peaks like meringue, sprinkled paprika across the white snow, and slid it back in for 10 more minutes to crisp the edges. Children called it the meat birthday. There was never a card. There was a magazine page from 5 years earlier and a memory baked into the muscle of her hands. Number 23. Fried bologna on white bread. A thick coin of Oscar Mayer bologna scored across the middle so it would not curl in the skillet. Fried in bacon grease until the edges blackened, then dropped onto sunbeam white bread with a stripe of French's mustard. In Pittsburgh, a pound of bologna and a loaf of bread carried a steelworker's pail through the whole week. The mill at Homestead ran 3 shifts, and the men packed the same sandwich for 30 years because nothing else held up under the heat near the open hearth. You ate it cold by the time the 11 o'clock whistle blew. The bologna had set into a chewy disc, and the mustard had soaked through one corner of the bread. It cost about 11 cents to pack in 1953. But now you cannot find a real one outside a Pittsburgh diner, and the diner charges $9 for the sandwich your great-grandfather ate for a dime. Number 12. Hoe cakes with sorghum. You whisked a cup of cornmeal, 1/2 cup of buttermilk, a beaten egg, salt, and a tablespoon of bacon grease, and spooned it into hot cast iron in palm-sized rounds. The name comes from the iron blade of a garden hoe, which freed slaves and sharecroppers used as a griddle over an open fire when there was no proper pan in the cabin. The Cherokee taught it to the colonists. Black families in South Carolina made hoe cakes a quiet act of survival through the Jim Crow century. You eat them with sorghum poured straight on top. They cost pennies. They are, by every honest measure, ancestral food. The genius was the bacon grease in the batter itself. A tablespoon of rendered fat made the hoe cakes brown the way a real pancake brown does, and the salt from the cured pork seasoned the corn from the inside. Without the grease, the cakes were chalky. With it, they tasted like the breakfast stove. Number 21. Hot milk cake. A boxed cake mix had landed on the shelf at the supermarket, but a woman who knew her stove could beat it from scratch in the time the oven took to preheat. 2 eggs whipped pale with a cup of sugar and a teaspoon of vanilla. A cup of flour folded in with a teaspoon of baking powder. Then a 1/2 cup of milk scalded with 2 tablespoons of butter, poured hot down the side of the bowl while the beater still spun. Into a greased pan. 25 minutes at 350. It came out tender and yellow and tasted like the inside of a bakery. A dusting of powdered sugar on top and nothing else. That was a birthday cake on a Tuesday in 1965, and a girl in pigtails got 2 slices because her mother knew the math worked out. Nobody handed her a card. She had simply watched her own mother do it for 30 years and knew the next move before the milk hit the bowl. Number 16. Sausage and pepper sandwich. An Italian-American shipfitter at the Bethlehem Yards in Sparrows Point, Maryland in 1944 packed cold sausage and fried bell pepper between two halves of a long, crusty roll his wife baked Sunday morning. The sausage came from a butcher on Eastern Avenue in Highlandtown who ground it himself with fennel seed and a splash of red wine. The peppers fried slow in the same black pan with the rendered sausage fat and a clove of garlic, and the whole sandwich went into the pail with a square of cheesecloth around it. By the 11 o'clock whistle, the bread had soaked up the orange grease and turned the color of brick. You ate it standing up over the rivet bin. The smell carried across the yard, and other men nodded the way men nod when they recognize a Sunday in a Tuesday lunch. Number 23. Tomato soup cake. You measured a can of Campbell's condensed tomato soup straight into the mixing bowl, and you got a spice cake out of the oven that nobody could place. The recipe showed up in community cookbooks around 1928, when eggs and milk were too expensive, and the soup did the work of dairy. The cake came out moist and dense, with a cinnamon and clove crumb that tasted like a campfire spice cake. Campbell's started printing the recipe on the soup label in 1960. Your great-aunt frosted it with cream cheese, served it on a Sunday plate, and let your uncle ask 3 times what kind of cake it was. She never told. The tomato acid activated the baking soda and gave the cake a tight crumb you cannot get with milk. The genius was always the sleight of hand. Nobody at the table knew they were eating a soup can. Number 13. Pineapple upside-down cake in cast iron. A can of Dole pineapple rings cost 29 cents at the Winn-Dixie in 1963. A jar of maraschino cherries cost $0.25. Your mother melted a half stick of butter in a 10-inch cast iron skillet on the stovetop, sprinkled 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar evenly across the bottom, and arranged 7 pineapple rings with a cherry in the center of each. The cake was a quick yellow batter from a Betty Crocker box, or beaten by hand from flour, sugar, eggs, and pineapple juice from the can. She poured the batter over the fruit and slid the skillet into the oven for 35 minutes. Out it came, hot, a plate over the top, a flip, a glistening crown of fruit and caramel on a tender cake. That was Sunday dinner dessert in a Florida ranch house with the windows open and the cicadas in the live oak. Number 9. Cold dumpling and broth. A retired chicken and dumpling supper went back into the pot on Monday morning. The broth was strained and poured hot into a thermos, and 3 cold flour dumplings rode in a tin cup. A Ford assembler at the Rouge plant in Dearborn in 1955 ate this exact lunch every winter Monday for 16 years. The dumplings were soft on the inside and toughened on the outside the way only a flour dumpling does after a night in the icebox. You poured the warm broth from the thermos over them at noon and ate the whole thing with a spoon while the conveyor moved past the windows. A bowl took 10 minutes. The broth had carried his mother through the worst of 1933 in a one-room apartment in Hamtramck, and now it carried him through a $2.32 an hour shift on the trim line. Start with one of these meals this week. Pick the dish that pulled at a memory the hardest, the one we remember, and put it on our Sunday table. Drop a comment and tell me which one your family loved most. The pantry will not need a single thing it does not already hold. The grocery bill will not move, and the people around the table will taste something they have not tasted in 40 years. That is the quiet trick the Depression cooks left behind. They did not stretch food because food was scarce. They stretched it because love was the one ingredient that never ran out, and a full bowl was the clearest way to prove it.